Welcome to Character Explorations, a podcast production of the Wendt Center for Character Education at the University of Dubuque. I'm Annalee Ward, the director of the Wendt Center, and our guest today is Dr. Jim Romagna, Assistant Professor of Health, Wellness, and Sport. He is the author of the article, Ritual in Sports, Transition and Transformation. This article is available online at dbq.edu/WENDT. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
As we think about this issue of the journal, Character and Transitions, I know you bring your experiences to this research. You've been an athlete, you've worked with coaches, you train athletes. I imagine you've seen a lot of transitions, and your article begins with a description of a locker room. What was it about this locker room that brought you to the topic of ritual in sports?
It's a junior hockey team, and it's Tier 1 hockey, which is really the best hockey players in North America. And the hot seat was brought to this program with the coach who had national championship experience in college. He played at the professional level. And the hot seat was essentially a ritual in which everybody on the team was critiqued by everybody else on the team, and everybody else meaning the players, the coaches, any of the staff that's involved in the team. And as I mentioned in the article, it was kind of a no-holds-barred approach of, you know what, just because you're the head coach, you're not going to be immune to the criticism. And everyone goes in knowing that. And it's that idea of leveling and bringing everybody to the same point, regardless of your seniority on the team, regardless of your role with the team. So everybody got a sheet of paper, and for everybody on that team, they got to write down something or more than one thing about that athlete, about that coach. And it was in effort as they transitioned from the regular season into the playoffs to say, okay, we've done a lot of good things, but we've really got some work to do because we want to win a championship. So we need to air all of our laundry. And how are we going to do that? You get to say whatever you want to say about anybody on this team. And as I interviewed one of those players, and it's quoted in the article, he said, this wasn't about name calling or about picking on somebody. This was about, being honest with that individual's talents and personalities and how they can best help the team going forward. So it was really an honest assessment by each player of each player in that organization. So how it actually played out was the athlete would sit on this proverbial hot seat in the chair in the middle of the locker room and was handed his sheet with what everybody said about him. And it was anonymous in that I didn't know who it was coming from, but they got to read what each person said about them, and they would verbalize it, they would say it out loud, they would hear it. So it was really a powerful moment. And when you talk to, I ended up interviewing 2 players from that team, and then when you talk to anybody who's gone through the organization that's taken part in that, they all kind of point to that as one of the biggest moments as being part of that team, which is interesting because it's not even on the ice, right? It's, what is the biggest moment? Well, it wasn't winning the championship. It was that moment of the hot seat where I really had to analyze myself based on what my players and my coaches were saying about me.
Was this a one-time event or a regular practice for this organization or this coach?
It was a regular practice for that coach that then I believe through tradition got carried on a few more years. But it was done one time throughout the year. And part of part of the article, and I gave tips on like how to implement ritual. I'll talk a little bit later about that, but that's some of the power is just doing it that one time. And then as I interviewed the head coach in my research for this article, he's already kind of morphed that into something different already, but something similar. And which is really interesting because part of the, I reference coaches, having to evolve in their philosophy and change the way they coach. And there's a guy who has all this experience and all this championships, and he's still kind of shaping his coaching philosophy. So he's even changed the way he does the hot seat.
Okay.
So.
Well, you give this example as a situation of transitioning from regular season to postseason play. What other kind of transitions are there in sports?
I make a few references of things like, the high school to the college transition. And that one is, if you're going from high school to college, no matter what level of play, Division III through Division I or NAIA or whatever it might be, you are in a very small percentage. And one of those difficult transitions is going from being the big fish in the small pond to being, the average fish in the, now now everybody around me is pretty darn good. So I no longer am the guy. So, that is a big transition for a lot of athletes. And sometimes they're ill prepared for that, in that they get there and they might quit, or they might give up, or they might get discouraged, or lose the desire. And so that's a tough transition. So some of the other transitions along with that, high school to college, or there's within seasons, which it's from regular season to championship season, and then probably the biggest one is when an athlete at any level or at any expertise is all of a sudden faced with, I'm no longer being a competitive athlete. And that's a very hard thing for a lot of people to deal with, moving on in life and making the transition from a student athlete to just a student, or from a person who is an athlete to just a person, and kind of losing that, I wouldn't say losing, but transitioning away from that identity as an athlete or an athletic person, because that's been so much of your identity. So it's kind of like, well,
Right.
Where do I go from here?
Well, you mentioned that this team used a ritual, and you've made this connection to transitions. And I'm wondering if you could help me a little bit more to understand, maybe is there theory involved that transitions and rituals are related, or are rituals a part of transition? How does this work?
Well, a ritual by definition, or by some definition, is repetitive, symbolic, purposeful behavior. And as far as, kind of differentiating between ritual and tradition. Traditions are things like, we do this all the time, or we shake hands after games, or we give medals, or we give places. Whereas ritual is really a single, distinctive, more powerful thing that is integrated within a season or within a career, that is really more of a defining moment of going from here's where we were, or where I am, and here's where I'm going. And it takes something a little deeper than just traditions that most everybody's familiar with.
I can see where even the small act of shaking hands afterwards, or fist bumps, or whatever it is they're doing, that is a small ritual that helps transition to the end of the game. It's over. This is, but before we leave, we're acknowledging our opponents or whatever. So rituals are a part, then, I'm hearing you say, of a transition, that they can be a part of that process. Well, you've mentioned the hot seat ritual used in this junior hockey league. Can you give us another example?
Another example that I used was Doc Rivers it was the head coach of the Boston Celtics, and he adopted the idea of Ubuntu, and which really in layman's terms is, I cannot be successful, I cannot be great unless you're successful and you're great.
This was Nelson Mandela's concept from South Africa, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. To kind of go back to the idea of leveling that I talked about with the hot seat, he came to his team and he said, here's the concept. And he actually shared it with some of the younger guys, the rookies, and here's the concept. You're going to explain it to the team. So right from the get-go, it was I'm taking off my coach hat, and this is going to be us, and it's going to come from the ground level, which is the players. So they kind of adopted that as their rallying cry for the year. So Ubuntu is more of a philosophy that he turned into a ritual. And although we want to be careful how often we use a ritual, they did adopt it as, every time they broke a huddle, they would break it to Ubuntu, and they would, if they got on the bus and somebody was doing something that wasn't, becoming of the team or the philosophy, they would call them on it, because of the idea that we're all the same. We need to build each other up and do, if you're bringing, your seatmate a coffee, you better bring coffee for the whole bus, right? So some of it was a little lighthearted, but for the most part, that was really, he felt, the driving force. And then the end of that story is they won the world championship.
And turned a bunch of individuals into a team,
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like.
Yeah. And
wow.
Probably one of the hardest things in sports to do is get people to realize their role and to play together as a team, especially at that highest level.
So it's really interesting. He took a philosophy and turned it into ritual in the huddle, and that has shaped them, reminded them. You also talk about another kind of transition, another example with the Bulls. What happened with the Chicago Bulls?
So the third ritual that I reference in my article is, in the article I refer to it as fire in the can, and it was something that Phil Jackson, if any of us out there experienced with him, we know that he is, he's really a kind of a very philosophical guy, and kind of a deep thinker, and so he came up with this ritual, and this was definitely a one-time thing, and I'm not even sure how, if it was just something he just came upon spontaneously or whatever, but the idea was that the franchise as we know it, the Chicago Bulls, after winning 6 world titles, were going to be dismantled. Like, the writing was on the wall. They knew it was coming. It had to do with contracts and trades, and and maybe kind of just we've run our course. It's time to do something else. And so he brought everybody together. And the neat thing about that was, Steve Kerr was part of that team, who's now an NBA coach of the Golden State Warriors. And he said it was one of the most, in all of the things that he's done and been a part of, it was the most powerful thing he's been a part of. And I think what made it so powerful, as they were all in that room as human beings, not as superstars. And remember, Michael Jordan's in this room, who is, arguably the most famous athlete in the world. And they were all sitting there as the season was over, some careers were over, the franchise as we know it was over. So it's like, what's next? And it was a way for Coach Jackson to help them transition from that really powerful team into wherever they're headed next. And he asked them to write anything they wanted, and they basically wrote these messages, read them out loud to the team, and then kind of the neat thing about that is none of what was said is ever. Maybe social media wasn't as strong back then, so they didn't have it recorded, but whatever was said within the walls of that locker room and never shared. And then they put the messages in that coffee can in the middle of this room, and he turned the lights out and turned it or lit it on fire. And that was like a really powerful closing to that group of athletes.
Wow. The gratitude, the opportunity there for a ritual to move on, your rituals of humility and compassion. It sounds to me like character building work. If students are playing sports, isn't character just a natural result of participation? Or what is the coach's role in character growth?
Well, we've often, for a long time, it's been very normal to say, that sports build character. And I've repeated that. I've thought that for a long time. And then the more you think about it and the more you read and research, and it's not really the actual participation in it, but there's moments that are created within sport that can be character building, and they can, the sport itself offers an opportunity to build ritual within that program or that team. And then that really is, as you can see from the 3 examples I use, they're all very unique. And would they work with other teams and with other groups? Probably not. And so it really comes down to the coach understanding the team dynamic and what they can and can't do with it, and will it work, and will it, when I interviewed the head coach about the hot seat, he said, because I asked him that, I said, you're coaching pros now, can you do that same thing with the pros? And he was hesitating. He goes, I don't know if it would really work. Like, it's just a different dynamic. So one of the things that makes good coaches is that they understand their team. They have their finger on the pulse of the team, and they know what they can and can't do with them, and they know what they need. So they can create these moments that can help those athletes transition and really, back to the hot seat, that character building was, listen, these kids were 16 to 20 years old sitting there and being told things that they had never heard from somebody before. And then they had to kind of take that in and think about it, and then come out on the other end, hopefully as a stronger person, a better person, and maybe taking to heart some of the things that they needed to change as an athlete and a person.
So coaches really can create these moments, and athletes too have a role in this work of character building and going through transitions with character. So what kind of purposeful behaviors are needed to help in transitions and in rituals in sport?
Well, at the end of my article, I list 5 things that really might be helpful to coaches and that they could employ. And I don't tell them what, again, the big thing is your team, so you have to come up with the actual ritual. Like, what do you think is going to work with the group you have? But those 5 are, start with create moments, and like, when is the right time to use it? And for example, in all 3 of these cases, one was transitioning from regular season to the playoffs. One was transitioning from, I believe the Celtics that year started out poorly, and he was really grasping for, like, okay, how do I get all these stars on the same page? So he was confronted with kind of a dilemma that he had to solve. So then he implemented it. So that was the moment that was created. And then with Phil Jackson and the Bulls, it was at the very end of this fabulous run of championship games. The second one is to be sincere with it. And as I alluded to, traditions and routines like handshakes and, maybe pregame routines, those are things that just kind of become automatic. But the ritual should be something that's really sincere and really almost held as sacred. Like, okay, this is not something that we take lightly. It's not something that we do every day because it will lose some of its power. And third is reflection, and this is really important when we talk about that transition. Is the time to reflect and give them time and space, especially if we go back to that hot seat. If you're a 17-year-old and you're being kind of told these things for the first time, you're like, oh, wow, this is really, I'm kind of blindsided by this. Nobody's ever said this to me. I've always been the best, and no one's ever been critical of my play or my actions or my personalities. So giving them time, and I asked him, I said, what was that like after that? I go, did you have practice? Did you give? He goes, we did have a practice, but it was optional. So some guys went out and just shot around. Some guys laughed and played around. Some guys, you could tell, were like really digesting that. And, so be respectful of that ability for them to really reflect on it, not hit somebody with something real powerful and then, oh, by the way, we've got to be on the ice in 5 minutes and ready to go. The fourth one is promote autonomy. And that's that idea of leveling and, be, as a coach, don't be a coach in that moment. Be part of the team. Be level with your players. Take the coach hat off. Be part of or embedded in the team and let them know that you're coming to them as another human being, not as their superior, as their coach. And then lastly, reinforcement. And don't diminish the ritual by going back to it with too much frequency, but refer back to it. And because it was a powerful moment, it should easily be recalled. And when I interviewed for that hot seat, one of the former players, the first thing he said to me, I said, can we talk about the hot seat? And he's been 13 years removed. And he said, yeah. He goes, I remember it like it was yesterday.
Good suggestions. Thank you for those ideas. It's been a delight to hear about this article, to chat with you today. Do you have any last words for us as we wrap this up?
I would say that probably the best synopsis is really the last sentence of my article. And it reads, sports like life is full of transitions and presents the opportunity to use rituals to help those transitional moments become deeper, more meaningful, and life-altering, truly transformative experiences.
Thank you, Jim. Our guest today has been Dr. Jim Romagna, Assistant Professor of Health, Wellness, and Sport. And I'm Annalee Ward for Character Explorations from the Wendt Center for Character Education at the University of Dubuque.